from KQED.
I'm Erica Cruz Guevara, and welcome to The Bay. Local news to keep you rooted. The June primary election is coming at us fast, and in Solano County, the race for district attorney is between the incumbent, Krishna Abrams, and her chief deputy DA, Sharon Henry. This choice could affect how crimes are prosecuted and other issues like victims' rights. But at the center of this race is police accountability. And that's a big deal here in Solano County, where the families of those shot and killed by Vallejo police are still waiting for justice.
You know, were Krishna Abrams to win this election, it kind of says a lot about whether or not the majority of the county, or at least like the electorate here, feels that, you know, maybe police reform efforts have gone kind of too far.
Today, the race for district attorney in Solano County.
Support for this podcast comes from Stanford's Master of Liberal Arts, offering a part-time graduate course of study, including history, literature, and political science. Info sessions are held in May, August, and October. mla.stanford.edu. And from Silicon Valley International School, the only Chinese, French, and German bilingual IB World School in the Bay, serving preschool through high school, located in Palo Alto and Menlo Park. SiliconValleyInternational.org.
You know, Solano County, it's not a particularly big county as far as the Bay Area goes. It's about, I think, a little more than 400,000 people, which is roughly the size of Oakland, but that's spread across the entire county.
Scott Morris is an investigative journalist for the Vallejo Sun.
You have this interesting political split there where the more progressive centers are down in Vallejo. You know, it's a post-industrial city, a very poor city, about 120,000 people. And then nearby that, there's Benicia, which is a much more affluent city, but is definitely a lot more liberal than some of the rest of the county tends to be. Towards the North County is where you get the more conservative areas, the more rural areas, especially Vacaville and Dixon.
Right.
You do have a lot of law enforcement power in Solano County. You know, there's a former sheriff's lieutenant that's on the board of supervisors. Vacaville City Council has a sheriff's sergeant who's actually on the city council there. You know, the former mayor of Vallejo was a former police sergeant. So a lot of police officers ends up elevating these positions, and, you know, crime tends to be a really big issue.
Scott, how would you sum up the choice that voters in Solano County have when it comes to the district attorney's race that we're going to be talking about?
The choice is between Krishna Abrams, who has been the DA for the last 8 years, and her chief deputy, Sharon Henry.
My name is Krishna Abrams, and I am the district attorney, and I've been dedicated to public service my whole life.
Krishna Abrams has worked in that office for a really long time, more than 20 years. She's been in the Solano County District Attorney's Office. And in 2014, she ran against her boss, Don Dubain.
There was some questions from people in the community feeling that some things weren't being ethical at the office. And I ran for DA in 2014 to restore the public's trust in the DA's office. And I feel like we've done that and more.
She was coming around alleging that there was these ethics violations that were coming out of the district attorney's office at the time that she was going to solve. She runs kind of on that platform on this issue of there being a lack of accountability in an office, and she ends up winning. And 4 years later, she ran unopposed for the office. This is the first time she's faced an opponent since.
And then tell me a little bit more about who's running against her, Sharon Henry. What's her current role and what's her background?
Sharon Henry is the Chief Deputy District Attorney in the Solano County District Attorney's Office.
I started out knowing that my guiding principles were to be fair, honest, neutral.
She started as a prosecutor in the Tulare County District Attorney's Office, where she met Krishna Abrams. Actually, when Krishna Abrams ran, she recruited Sharon Henry to come and be her chief deputy in her office. So, this is somebody who Krishna Abrams recognized as somebody that she wanted to work with back when she was elected, that she wanted in her office. And now Sharon Henry, 8 years later, has decided that, she thinks that Krishna Abrams' leadership is intolerable and there needs to be a change in the county.
And I've seen lots of changes throughout these 34 years. What has not changed is the community's desire and demand to hold all offenders accountable.
So, Scott, what are some of the big issues at the center of the DA's race in Solano County right now?
Police accountability is kind of the biggest issue in this DA's race, and particularly police shootings and how those are investigated. There's also kind of allegations of how the office is run and whether Krishna Abrams is running a fair or professional environment in that office. There's questions about, whether victims' rights are respected. There's also an issue of whether or not there's enough diversity in the office and whether or not there's enough, people of different backgrounds to kind of look at cases differently.
Scott, I want to kind of dive deeper into Krishna Abrams' record as the current DA. I know she's been at the center of a lot of controversy, as you've just been talking about, around police accountability in the last few years. Can you remind us about that and why it's such a big part of this election?
A key issue has been these two shootings by Vallejo police officers, Willie McCoy in 2019 and Sean Monterosa in 2020. And both of these cases were just, huge deals. They were national news. There was protests about them. So there was a lot of pressure on the district attorney's office to make a decision, and to charge these officers with crimes relating to these incidents. And what Krishna Abrams did was she refused.
I am here today to announce that I'm recusing myself and our office from reviewing the two recent officer-involved fatal incidents in the city of Vallejo, involving Willie McCoy and Sean Monterosa, and referring them to the Attorney General's office.
And she said she was recusing her office, which is, a legal term for if you have some kind of conflict of interest or reason that, it would be inappropriate to fulfill your duty. But her reasoning stated reasoning was basically that the community didn't trust her to make this decision to, be impartial when it comes to crimes allegedly committed by police officers.
And has Abrams been pretty pro-police as a DA?
Yes. Krishna Abrams is very much, wants to be an ally to law enforcement. Any prosecutor, of course, has to work closely with law enforcement because law enforcement is conducting the investigations that the district attorney's office, was going to use to prosecute any criminal case. There's always this kind of tight relationship, but the question is whether or not Krishna Abrams has sacrificed the office's independence and her allegiance to law enforcement.
How has Krishna Abrams responded to some of the criticism fielded against her, especially as it relates to her ability to do her job?
She's held that she was correct to recuse herself from that.
I was listening to my community. My community was saying, we don't believe that you can be fair based upon a perceived conflict, even though we absolutely could have been fair.
One of the things she said she did is that she put a task force together that has a protocol for how officer-involved shootings and critical incidents should be investigated.
It took 6 years. I never gave up on it. And we finally got it over the hump in November of 2020.
She also holds that she has restored the trust of the community, but it's not really clear how she's done that.
I want to turn now, Scott, to Sharon Henry, who, as we've been talking about, works for Krishna Abrams. What does she say about why she's running against her own boss?
One of the key things that she says is she was really disturbed by the recusals in the McCoy and Monte Rosa cases. And she hasn't really discussed those cases in particular, but she's also been very clear that she thinks that it is the DA's office to make kind of difficult decisions, even when it comes to politically complicated or controversial subjects.
Yes, we work closely with law enforcement, and I am the first person to say that I respect law enforcement. I always have. And they will be the first to say if an officer has, engaged in any misconduct or is not justified in their actions, that they should be held accountable. We have to make those decisions in order for the community to trust their leaders.
She says that she didn't see any grounds for recusals in those, and she was really disappointed in her office. That's been a key issue for her, but it's also kind of about how the office is internally run. She says that, there's a lot of favoritism, that there's not a lot of fairness in kind of how people are treated or promoted, that there's, a lack of diversity among the staff to, better relate to clients or even defendants.
And I know Henry also talks a lot about victims' rights. What does she say about how victims' rights are handled now at the DA's office and how she wants to change that?
I mean, under California law, there is, victims have certain rights when it comes to how prosecutions are handled. And one of the rights that they have is to be kind of informed of any settlement that comes up, with a defendant, and be able to weigh in on that. And Henry says that that's regularly not happening.
That gets violated all the time, where cases are being pled out, deals going on without the victim or the victim's family even knowing about it.
Another problem she says that's going on is that there's just a lot of turnover on the staff. And she says that can impact victims as well, because if you get 3 or 4 different prosecutors on it, it's hard to kind of build that trust and relationship.
I want to talk now about the endorsements. Which groups are supporting each of these candidates, starting with Krishna Abrams?
Krishna Abrams has been endorsed by almost every police officers association in the county, with the notable exception of the Vallejo Police Officers Association, which has made no endorsement. Maybe because, Vallejo police shootings have become such a big issue that it may not help Abrams very much to have that endorsement. She also has the endorsement of the current sheriff, who is Tom Ferrara. Henry has received a lot of support from various elected officials. The mayors of both Vallejo and Benicia have endorsed Sharon Henry. The Service Employees International Union has endorsed Sharon Henry. Solano County Democratic Party has endorsed Sharon Henry. Progressive Democrats of Benicia have also endorsed Sharon Henry. So she's got a lot of support from the kind of more liberal sides of the county.
I feel like this race in Solano County is really interesting, Scott, especially sort of within the larger context of DA races across the Bay Area, which many of them seem to be about choices between either a very progressive approach to policing and prosecuting crimes, or choosing someone who is much more tough on crime. You have the DA recall in San Francisco over Chesa Boudin, who's being accused of being too lax on crime. I'm curious how you're thinking about what makes the DA's race in Solano County similar or different to other races happening across the Bay Area right now.
Sharon Henry does want to address racial inequality in the criminal justice system, that this is something that, she has talked about. What she's not talking about doing as much, though, is changing how cases are prosecuted so much as that she just thinks that there has to be a closer look at what cases are prosecuted. So there's similarities, but I don't think that, she's not quite the same kind of prosecutor as Chesa Boudin or George Gascon.